smooth that fadeaway was. Why can't I do that well on Fridays? Hello, everyone. Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to my weekly behind-the-scenes DM-only live stream, Crafting Annihilation, which I build, write, and prepare for our next session of Tomb of Annihilation. If you're playing characters Mannix, Celeste, Gillian, George, or Theron, go away. You are not welcome here just yet, but for the rest of you, welcome. We stream our Tomb of Annihilation sessions live on YouTube every Friday evening. You can catch up on previous episodes on my YouTube page, as well as read weekly session recaps at roguewatson.com. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Ribzung, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Marco Stead, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all for your support. For your campaign, we use Roll20.net for streaming. I use Open Broadcaster software with Streamlabs. Reminder, we are recording this month's DM Roundtable, which is a monthly session where we jump on Discord, we meaning patrons and I, to discuss various topics to do with running tabletop role-playing games. So we are recording October's today at 1 o'clock my time. It is currently 11 o'clock my time, so that is in 2 hours. So about the time I end Crafting Annihilation, we'll have 1 hour, and then we will be recording, not streaming, just recording our DM roundtable for this month. And it looks like the topic is going to be house rules. We're going to be discussing house rules, and I will probably get that video up tomorrow. So you can look forward to doing that. And I do try to rotate for the future, doing roundtables in the afternoon time, this time slot, in other words, the 1 p.m. my time, and then also an evening time slot at 9 p.m. my time, and just kind of do an A-B schedule with every month. That way, just try to include more people, as many as I can. That still works in my schedule, but hopefully will allow more people in different time zones and different work schedules and everything else to be able to attend. So don't feel bad if you can't make this one. Hopefully you'll be able to make one at some point, but that's this month's will be the 1 o'clock one. So hello, Michael. And D&D for Dummies. Hello, Jordan, was it? I still need to get back to your email about that. Sorry, I'm really bad with emails. Usually I'm pretty good, but that one, I had to think about that one. So let's talk about Rackhamar. So they got through the fight. I did have to pull a few punches, although not too many. I was impressed by how well the players were able to rally here. Again, the key was Theron not only smartly disengaging from the huge fight that occurred here, and unfortunately I had to get rid of a lot of the bodies because, frankly, they were just in the way, but this entire area is hilariously covered in the slain enemies. So at some point, you got to stop your players from being able to rest among, like, the corpses of the slain, right? I mean, how often do players, like, sit there in a room, they've just, killed a bunch of monsters, and they're like, all right, we're gonna take a rest here. And I'm like, really? Are you? There's like bodies of horribly mutilated creatures all around you, and you're gonna chill for an hour? Like, all right. That's just a silliness in D&D's part. Same reason why, characters in movies don't usually have to go to the bathroom and that kind of thing. You just don't worry about that kind of thing. But the Sleet Storm, this Scroll of Sleet Storm, and when I look at my players' abilities, I usually forget about these random finite things, and I'm impressed when players do remember about them, because that brings me joy. That's like, hey, this was a dire fight that caused you to use a precious item, and I really like seeing that as a DM, because I want to be able to give players these cool fight-changing, one-time use things. But if players never use them, and I get it, like the video game mentality is like, oh, if I have a finite amount of this thing, if I have only like 4 health potions or something, I'm going to go so long without using a health potion. But the unique thing about D&D is that the game, i.e. me, can balance it for that. So if you're using a lot of health potion, you're using these finite things, and I can feel better about giving you more of these items. Whereas if you are hoarding these things and not using them, then I, as a DM, I'm going to be less inclined to give you more of them. Or maybe I'll look and see, like, why aren't you using this, and I'll give you a different kind of item. But still, I like it when players use these kind of things. So, and I think it was very effective, because in this case, presumably, I would assume creatures that are very attracted to fire, and fire is built into their whole livelihood and culture, that having a sudden ice storm appear would freak them the fuck out. So although Sleet Storm isn't a huge ability as is, in fact, I don't even think it does damage. It just like knocks them prone. I treated it almost as a giant zone of fear for these creatures, and essentially that Sleet Storm took out two big players, which were the two Warlocks on Striders here, which were just guards that I'd brought over to the fight anyway, and I believe they were extra creatures that I added onto this dungeon. So that Sleet Storm stopped them. It also stopped the Fire Newts from chasing Theron. They were able to catch up and kill this Warlock and basically gather together, which was the smart thing to do, and then assault the giant army of Fire Newts that had approached them, which didn't end up being too terribly effective because they bunched up. The players bunched up too, but by that point, I didn't have too many Warlocks left. It was just the Fire Newts, and Fire Newts can be very strong, but they're also very squishy and mostly relegated to melee attacks. Notice how I did have them burn through that thorn wall. I just kind of made up a rule that like, okay, well, they're all going to expend their Spitfire ability to essentially melt this thorn wall. I have no idea if you can even burn down a magical plant. I don't know what the rules are there. I just made that choice of like, all right, well, if I block off both ends, I'm going to let them get through one end. They're not really afraid of thorns the way they would be a Sleet Storm, so they're just going to use all of their fire abilities to knock down the thorn wall. So what it did is expended all of their Spitfire, which was still pretty useful for the players. Theron summoned another Allosaurus, which was key because the Allosaurus was able to tank a lot of damage, and then the players were able to kind of pull back. Shockingly, I was still not able to take anybody down, despite still playing very fast and loose with the Warlock spell slots in terms of what all they can do. I think I did tone it down a little bit from per last week's Crafting Annihilation, which we discovered that they only have the 2 spell slots. So instead of like just launching Scorching Rays every turn, I think I backed off and just did a few Fire Bolts instead of Scorching Rays. But still, doing a lot of damage to the players. Everybody's hovering between, I mean, look at George is at like 20% health or something. And up to like 40% health. Like everybody is pretty damaged. Now, granted, Theron had another summon and he had another wild shape in use. And Gillian, it's too bad that Rochelle, the player, wasn't actually here for that because Gillian might have been the MVP with the insane amounts of AoE attacks she was able to do. First on the Striders here and then on the Fire Newts over here. There's previous campaigns, especially our Storm King's Thunder campaign. Our party was built for just unleashing. We had 2 sorcerers in that campaign, and they were both had insane AoE attacks that just demolished hordes of enemies. This group is almost the opposite. They're very good about single target damage and bosses because I've got so many rogues. But just having one like low tier 2 bard, granted with some extra abilities. So like, I gave her that bagpipe of stormy seas, whatever, that had some extra like the tidal wave ability. So she has some augmented abilities with that, but she was able to unleash tidal waves and shatters and do enough giant AoE damage to where I was painstakingly rolling like a dozen saving throws, which this is an interesting case of because we play in Roll20, we are kind of sticklers for doing rolls. But if I was running like a real stage show or something, like a real trying to keep up with keeping the pace and everything, I would have absolutely hand waved and been like, all right, well, 5 of them die, because it took so long to sit there and roll all these saves. And in the end of the day, does it really matter that you're keeping track of these, like exactly which ones fail and survive? Especially in that case, I get if there's a giant boss fight or something, you need to keep track of the numbers. But when you literally have a dozen enemies on the board, if I actually roll the numbers and 6 or 7 of them die, whereas if I hand waved and said like 5 of them die, I don't think that matters too much. But we did end up pulling the numbers because in Roll20, it just... I'm leery to hand wave those kind of numbers because I do think players like doing that. But at that point, we were at the end of 2 straight weeks of combat. And I like combat for sure. In fact, in our previous campaign, the previous one I ran, which was Lost Mine into Princes of the Apocalypse, I think I made a note of remarking at some point that we'd never gone a whole session without combat. Sometimes that combat was really quick, but we'd always had some kind of combat in a session. And then Storm Kings, we immediately broke that pretty early on. I remember we had like the whole session like in the ball and stuff like that. Or not the ball, it was like a dinner party. And I was really impressed that Chris was able to run that. And then we had sessions in here that I believe had no combat also, which is really cool. And I think every once in a while we can get into the role-playing thing. If you were to balance the scales and be like, murder hobo for the most used phrase, versus a heavy RP group, which I would say would be like the Acking C team, for example, which I think hardly ever does combat. Those would be like some of the there's probably some other heavy roleplay groups. Those would be like the extremes. If you would put those on a scale, I think we definitely point more towards Murder Hobo, but not completely. Like, we do like having our own personal stories and role playing our characters and having those social encounters. But Tomb of Annihilation especially seems very, very designed for not necessarily super role play, because you're in the fucking jungle and it's just nothing but dungeons and dinosaurs in here. So there's hasn't been a huge amount of opportunity because it was so front loaded with Port 9 and Zaru. But that being said, I don't know if we've ever had 2 straight weeks of nothing but combat. That might have been a first, and I didn't necessarily expect that one fight, which granted, I guess technically didn't start immediately the week before that. We did a little bit of, Gillian pointing them over there, but I feel like within like 30 minutes of starting that session, I'd have to go look at the tape, but we started that combat and that lasted the entire time. And then combat very much lasted from the beginning. We were literally in the middle of initiative order until the end, when I finally basically suggested to the players, hey, back the fuck off and let's not continue this combat encounter. I'm glad you enjoyed it, D&D for Dummies. And like I said, combat is fun. I like combat. I know my players like combat. A lot of times we treat D&D in a very video gamey fashion, and you can still have fun with that. You can still have some, fun role-playing moments, and it's just, it can be empowering and challenging and all those things. So I like combat for sure. But that being said, almost 2 straight sessions of combat is what led me to basically back off with the fire newts and tell the players to essentially retreat here. Basically, I'm giving them an out. Like, I'm saying, hey, it's okay to tactically pull back. Maybe retreat is too strong of a word. Tactically disengage and short rest. I'm definitely not letting the players long rest. I know my wife mentioned that at one point to me off camera. I was like, all right, we can back off. Or I think maybe during the stream, like, let's back off and long rest. Like, no, you're not going to fucking camp in these caves for 8 hours. You're going to get murderized. But I could let them back off in short rest. That's kind of what short rests are designed for, is in the middle of the dungeon and we need to take a breather. And, it's basically your spellcasters are still going to be out of their spell slots. In fact, I think Gillian and Theron have both burned through, hopefully now, all of their spell slots. I'm not sure if Gillian's actually correctly gets rid of her. Well, maybe they were. She still has 4. That still doesn't seem right to me, but I'm not paying that much attention. I know Theron has got to be like out though. At least she's out of her higher. I guess she was using her bagpipes and those all have spell slots, so she does cast more spells than I think she can. Theron, however, he still has 2 third-level spell slots. You bastard! Wow. Okay, that's more than I thought. No, he summoned. He does not have 2. He conjured animals twice. That's bullshit. I'm calling bullshit on these players. Make me go through and look at the tape. Because he summoned an Allosaurus earlier, and then he just summoned another Allosaurus. So at the very least, he spent 2 third-level spell slots. So I'm not sure if these sheets are quite up to par on that. I think Sleet Storm is the spell scroll, so I would let that one pass. But I think he's only got the 1 spell slots left, so he's pretty. And obviously he's on his last wild shape. Now he does get the wild shapes back on a short rest, which is huge. Gillian, I think, has a Pearl of Power, so she might get a spell slot back. But otherwise, this team is actually pretty well equipped for recharging on short rest, considering they're actually very, I was going to say the opposite of magic dependent, just a low magic party. So short rest benefits them quite a bit. They can spend hit dice. We just don't get an opportunity to short rest that much. They never short rested in the Wormheart Mine, and then I let them long rest, much to my chagrin, during the tunnel. So this would be the first time they'd short rested in a while. So I will let them back off in short rest, but that does mean that gives an hour for the fire. They're probably cheating. I don't think they're cheating. I think it's just trying to keep up with it. I think at one point, and the problem is, Roll20 changes things around. They'll have an update or something. Like, for example, our long rest button no longer works. Our macro. I still need to look into that. But like at one point we had it when you cast a spell, it automatically deducts from there. And I don't think that works anymore, for example. So it might be a case of like the players having to now manually do that, whereas they didn't before. So it's that kind of thing. I'm not the kind of DM where I'm gonna be like, okay, make sure you deduct that spell. We play it pretty casually. But that being said, if I notice that, like, hey, how many third level spell slots have you cast by now? That kind of thing, then I might bring attention to it. But otherwise, I'm not gonna pay too much attention to it because, frankly, I've got enough to pay attention to. I can't babysit the players' own character sheets and abilities. That's way too much for me to handle. I can handle my creatures alone. That's it. Now, on a short rest, the Fire Newts get a chance to regroup. They don't have a whole lot of numbers left, but they've got enough to still have a pretty big combat encounter here. I don't think there's anything actually going on. In these. Let's see. This is a armory, a forge, and two forge rooms, I guess, and just a bunch of stores. Otherwise, there's just like the nests and things. It never mentions if the Fire Newts have any treasure whatsoever, and I know that's something my players are going to bring up. They are sentient humanoids, so they would presumably have some kind of barter system, but they're also militaristic. I guess I should have looked up Fire Newts when they're in Volos or something to see what kind of treasure they would have, if any, or if they would be just, looting the Rackhamar treasure. Maybe they found some. I might do like precious gems or something. Maybe since they deal with like volcanoes and fire, maybe they would collect precious gems, and that's always a more fun loot for players to get rather than just straight money. So I'd probably give them some kind of, instead of having to roll some kind of nightmare, like here's what all these individuals would have on them, probably just find like a treasure cache of gems or something. We do have we have to restart the API script. Yeah, we have that because it was also supposed to deduct, like anytime, for example, Gillian uses a bardic inspiration, it's supposed to automatically deduct that. And same for anytime somebody uses their ammo, it's supposed to deduct that from here. So I thought that all works correctly, and maybe it does, and they're just forgetting to click something. I don't know. So we'll see how that works. But as I said, and the problem is I'm giving the players a lot of magic type abilities that also do not deduct spell points. It's built into the item, and I don't think Roll20 has a good way of adding like your own custom resource other than putting it in here. But then how do you do it? I guess you could do one for every single use of, like, because it's supposed to be that she has one use of all these different spells from her bagpipes. So she'd have to create like a, one of one for every single, which I guess you could do, but otherwise you have to just keep track of it somewhere. And part of the problem with Roll22 is because it's like this instead of a paper sheet. You can't just sit there and make little notes in the margins or something. You have to actually come up with a system. Anyway, so I assume the players will want to continue this fight. I assume the Fire Newts will want to continue this fight. They've seen the prowess of the players. None of the players have gone down, which has got to be disheartening for... none of the characters have gone down, which has got to be disheartening for these Fire Newts. Would they try to just full-on retreat? That doesn't seem too interesting. They still have a couple Warlocks left. Now, obviously, if they short rest, this thing only lasts for an hour, so the Sleet Storm is coming down. The Warlocks all get their spell slots back. So at the very least, the Warlocks will be back to full strength. They could just like fortify the area, I guess, which would be interesting because then, the players kind of know what's coming. I don't know if they, assuming, again, I'm just not going to let them long rest. That's not even an option, but I will give them the option to short rest. I don't know if that's enough time for the Fire Newts to actually regroup and attack the players. If anything, I would assume they would try to fortify their positions, although they've also seen a lot of AoEs go down, so I don't know how they would react to that as well. What would the Fire Newts do? WWFD. What would the Fire Newts do? I made a joke earlier about resting among all the corpses in here. Technically they can short rest anywhere. It doesn't say you have to short rest in like decent conditions. You just have to be able to chill for an hour. So the only question is, how does the rest of the dungeon, which is very, very aware of them, react to this? And they don't have... they can turn on their... They can all have their flaming spheres on, I guess. How long does that one actually... Is it flaming or fire sphere? I think it's flaming sphere. Or does that thing last for like a minute? Yeah, it lasts for a minute, so they're not going to turn that on too soon. Use the tracking section as a point to the script in some way to sustain standalone text. A short rest on the forge side of the lava, the fire newts could send attackers around to flank them from the back side. They could. I don't know if that would be more effective than the fire newts actually all getting together and creating another big fight, though, rather than just a little skirmishes, because clearly they've seen the players. They know they're very strong. I mean, yeah, I could have some guards come around the back and flank them. What I might do, the sleet storm will go down. And the players know that there's a door here. That's where they were able to see the fire newts retreat into this door. And obviously they see this part of the hallway here, so they know there's a whole forge area up here. So what I could do is wait for the players to assault this door, assuming they want to do the whole like tactical breach thing, and then leave some of the guards down here to where they can then come around the corner down here, assuming the players haven't tried to fan out, and then surround the players that way. That could create a more interesting fight, because they might say, well, let's just try to funnel and unleash some more AoEs. But like I said, I think the players are a little more drained of their capabilities, and if they short rest, they still don't get a whole lot of their big AoE spells back. She's got one shatter left, and that's it. She's got nothing else in the tank other than sleep. Could be interesting, but even a level 1 sleep, I don't know how effective that would be. What is the 5d8? What is that on average? It's 20 hit points. Something like that. Maybe, it's probably about 20. What's barely going to knock out one fire newt. God, sleep does not scale very well. Well, I guess scaling in D&D, you have to use higher spell slots, and that's the problem, is you're competing with better spells at that point. So that's my advantage, is the players are not going to be able to long rest. They won't have a lot of their big AoE tools. So we could have one final interesting showdown, but I'm going to try to create, somewhat of a more tactical. I mean, it was always tactical before, but maybe do some kind of surrounding maneuver with my last 2 Strider Warlock combos here. I'll have more Warlocks up here. They'll have all their spells ready to go. Obviously, this will be an interesting scenario where the players could try and stealth, maybe, but at this point, I mean, I don't know how the players would be able to stealth their way over here. They've got the fire newts have clear line of sight. Maybe the players try and get creative and they go around, but they've already seen kind of this is the rightmost area. So I think they must know that these are the only 2 entrances into this area right here. And yes, with this little lava pool right here, I would be very interested in trying to grab a player and shove them into that, because I assume that's a similar straight up lava damage here. And I wasn't able to do that before, and I remember reading about that, as I could grab a player and put them in there, but that wasn't really a good situation, because unfortunately, any of the combats weren't terribly close to the fight. The closest I got would have been down here whenever Theron ran away, but immediately he cast that sleet storm, and that really prevented the fire newts from operating in here. Had he not done that, hell yeah, these fire newts would have run over here, and I would have one of them would have probably tried to grab him and walk over here to the lava, which would have been delicious. So it's looking like we're going to get one final. I might just delete these guys. This feels very anticlimactic to have this group over here, because I don't want too many more fights in Rackhamar. We've kind of exhausted the potential here. At some point, you've killed enough fire newts, I feel like. But with the knowledge base that both the players and the enemies now know about each other, and they know what each other are capable of, that could at least create an interesting fight. And the fact that the players, they will be at full hit points, because they can short rest and burn through all their hit dice. And they'll have recharged a lot of their stuff. So Theron will have his wild shapes back. George will have all his second winds and fighter shit. But they won't have a lot of their once per day stuff. So like Mannix's magic mince wand and Gillian spells and all that kind of stuff. So They'll be a little bit of a recharge, but they won't have a lot of their big devastating punches that they were able to pull at the beginning of the fight. So this will be one last hurrah, I think, here in Rackhamar. And then do I want them to loot the treasury on their own and try to do that, or return to the albino dwarves and say, hey, coast is clear, now you can reward us? That'll really be up to the players, because they are more than welcome to try to break into the treasury on their own. There's one little puzzle that if you fuck it up, this bridge retracts, which is kind of neat because the lever's like on the other side, which creates an environmental hazard all of a sudden. But I think the players would have to really fuck things up to make that happen, which means I may have that be more of a difficult challenge then. I might change that puzzle around a bit. There are some troops down here at this weird like shrine that actually holds the key to the treasury up here, but there's no real good way to get here. I guess you could climb these chains across. And it feels really, really weird to include any enemies left over from this fight, because by now, especially once the players short rest, these warlocks would absolutely join the battle. So I guess I've got these other troops over here I could use. In fact, I need to start giving everybody numbers, don't I? So I can be prepared for that. See, 1, 2, we'll give you number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is pretty handy. 7. That way you can say, I'm gonna, instead of killing, I'm gonna kill the north center one. I'm gonna go after orange 8, that kind of thing. 9. I ran out of colors. Numbers, I mean. 2, 3, 5, 6. We get to make you. You were the new number 1. Oops. Congratulations, you're moving up in the world. I guess you're gonna be blue 1. And so we've got 1, 2. This is very like Gloomhaven-ish too. All the monsters have numbers on them, and that actually determines the initiative order of the monsters individually. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. We'll make you green 7. Green 8. You get to be blue 2 and 3. And no, I'm not rolling hit points for any of these guys. There's just too many monsters on the board. And at some point, especially once you only have like under 25-ish hit points at this level, I feel like there's not going to be a whole lot of difference between 18 hit points and 22 hit points. You might roll really bad and have a 12 hit point fire newt. You might roll really good and have a 30 hit point fire newt. But the law of averages with such low numbers, I'm okay with just leaving them all as average hit points at this point. I usually like to roll hit points for monsters because it does create some fun variants. You can have a really weak one or a really strong one, but if I have more than like 5 of a monster on the board, that I don't really want to. Oh, these guys would probably heal on a short rest, wouldn't they? I'm going to go ahead and heal them up. Why not? If you guys short rest, they get to short rest too. There aren't any rules about that. I don't know, math 13. About monsters being able to heal themselves on a rest, but I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow it. 3, 4. And I guess I can move these guys around a little bit, but while the players still have vision, I need to keep them there. It's not too cheatery on my end. Just barely see in there. Which is interesting, though, if this Allosaurus stays up. Now, summon monster does require concentration. Can you still concentrate and short rest at the same time? That's a real question I have. Roll for random encounters if they short rest. I mean, I'm really don't want to include any more encounters at this point. We just had 2 giant encounters, and they're fixing to have another encounter. I'm not worried about throwing too many encounters at them, frankly. I'm okay with them short resting. I really am. They cannot long rest. I will straight up forbid that. If you're a video game, this would be like a no rest zone, but you can short rest. Because I think the Fire Newts would also want to back off and regroup. They want to have that time to heal up and figure out their next strategy. So I think specifically they would not jack with the players. Instead, they would try to back off and realize they just lost like half their fighting forces. Funnel in, remember to dash with the movement, because when you rushed the stockade for the mounts, you simply did movement, not a dash, which lined them up perfectly for the AoE attack. That is true. I always forget to dash. Yeah, I did move. I did just move in there with 30. Stupid fire newts, not using their abilities to the most. Every creature can use an action to dash and disengage. That is good DM advice in general. Stealth through the forge, opening and ambush the party from the lava where they are hiding. No concentration while resting. Okay. So the Allosaurus. What I was trying to frame was going to happen. And I think I just mentioned this last week's session was the Allosaurus will buy you guys the time you need to back off. Although it sounds like they're going to have to restrain George. To back off and short rest. Once they begin the short rest, the Allosaurus will poof. And the fire newts might be... If they were like monstrous creatures, then they might, vengeful, they might use that opportunity to rush the players. But I think fire newts, being very militaristic and at least somewhat intelligent, would actually use that opportunity to back off, regroup, heal their wounded, fortify their position, do all of that stuff. I would probably let them be in here and use partial cover and try to shoot at the players as they try to enter, although that makes kind of a bigger slog happen with... I kind of want the players to actually come in here. Well, hopefully it'll create an interesting scenario of the fire newt sitting here and doing the around the corner, shooting out fire bolts while the players are coming in and rushing. I don't think I'm going to let the players stealth. I guess stealth, I don't know how much you should rely on stealth versus skill checks versus logic. And I realize applying logic to a fantasy world with dragons and dinosaurs can be somewhat laughable. But let's face it, we all can be sticklers for real world physics, and we assume the Forgotten Realms uses Euclidean math and everything. So gravity exists in this universe and that kind of thing. How logical is it for the players to be able to stealth their way out of this very obvious exit with the fire newts are watching? Now, it is a dark area, although I think this is lit up. Is it not lit up naturally? Yes. However, right now I know Gillian's got a huge light source on her, so she's lighting up this tunnel. But normally, I believe this area is actually pretty dark. But this area, in fact, you can kind of see the outline right here. This area is lit up. So I think once they would exit this area, I'm not sure how. I guess you could just do a stealth versus sneak. The problem is my party is so goddamn good at stealthing. That's one thing between all these rogues and having Pass Without Trace available, stealth opportunities are good. But if they come up with a good solution or distraction, then I'll certainly let them do that. It's always a fun solution, is to see what the players come up with. If you'd like to knock an enemy down to just a couple HP, then you get to say, yeah, he's done. Yeah, that usually happens. Theron, roll hit dice if he stays in wild shape. That is an interesting question. I forget that he can actually stay in wild shape for a while. I think we were looking up druid shit last time, weren't we? How long can he be in wild shape these days? I want to say it's something to do with his level. Half his level or something in hours? Let's see here. Wild shape. You can stay in beast shape for a number of hours equal to half your druid level rounded down. So he can stay in beast shape for 3 hours. Beast shape does not require concentration. You know what? I would argue, there's probably a rule about this somewhere. I'm sure somebody's going to show me a Jeremy Crawford tweet. But I would argue that if he short rests in beast shape form, then he can heal his beast shape hit points and not his regular human hit points, or dwarf hit points, I guess, in this case. So, because I don't think it's ever happened before where he short rests. The campaign's been weird. There's not a whole lot of dungeons, a lot of overland travel, so it's a lot of long rest. Although I did change things into short rest, but I don't think there's ever been a case of him short resting in beast form. So I don't think I've actually ruled on that yet. And I'm tempted to rule that he could rest. He could expend hit dice to heal his beast shape form. But again, well, I guess it's not pointless because you would get your wild shapes back. So if you stay in beast shape, and short rest. I'm just now discovering druid strategies. That means you have your beast shape on and you have an additional 2 wild shapes, right? Is it still 2? So that's a big advantage. You just gained a whole nother, instead of reverting, you just gained a whole nother shape on top of that. So I think that's what I'm leaning towards. Like the caveat is you cannot actually heal your dwarf form up, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a official ruling on that, but I would rule that if he wants to stay in beast shape form, that's totally fine during a short rest. He can still do that, but he can only heal his actual beast shape form and not his main dwarf form. But that is interesting. Stealth is not equal to invisibility and disappearing. That is very true. Yeah, and it's tricky because as a DM, you kind of want your players to be able to come up with new tactics and do things, but at some point you have to say, like, look, you can't fucking stealth into this lit ass room with creatures like staring right at you, knowing you're there. Like, it's just not. Your stealth is not magical. It's still stealth. Like you at least the players have to come up with a distraction or do something else to be able to make this stealth happen. I agree that stealth shouldn't just be this magical, like, you're invisible in here. Like, come on. Even if you roll like a crit stealth, there are still times when somebody's going to fucking notice you. You can be the quietest thing in the world, and somebody's going to accidentally see you if you're walking into just a fully lit, like, there's no shadows anywhere, and the person's staring at the door. If you open that door, I don't care what stealth check you're rolling, somebody's getting seen. When you transform, you assume the beast hit points and dice. Yeah. So I think that's a good point, because that might come up where he wants to remain in beast form and short rest. I would tell him exactly that. You can certainly spend hit dice to heal, but it will only affect your beast form and not your druid form, unless somebody comes at me with a Jeremy Crawford tweet or something that says otherwise, and then I may have to rule in the player's favor for that. But otherwise, I think that's an interesting balancing tool. Is you can definitely hang on to your wild shape, but the consequence is you can't actually heal your main form. I've been looking at trying to think ahead a little bit, because I've had some time now that the player's been stuck in Rackhamar for so long, which is one big fight about some loot rewards for either the treasury or when they turn in this quest, essentially. Pull up my notes on Rackhamar. I still need to share this document to Platinum patrons too. I haven't done that yet. My notes are so scatterbrained in here too, because it's just been fighting. So there hasn't been a whole lot of role-playing notes or anything like that. It's just like, well, here's a giant fight. Just roll with it. Who knows what the player's going to do? I was thinking about giving them turning Moradin's Gauntlet, which is the only treasure in this area. They can get a bunch of ingots, which are worth money. Fine, that's okay. It's not a terribly exciting. At some point, money, unless you have a strict money sink in your campaign, money just seems kind of worthless to players. I mean, they still like amassing wealth and power and status and everything, but at some point it's just like, oh, you found another 50 gold, throw it on the pile, kind of a deal. So magic items are different. Magic items are cool. I was thinking about turning Moradin's Gauntlet into a magic item that, when worn, and it's just the one gauntlet, you can essentially, it makes your hand immune to fire, but only your hand. So you can grasp things that are on fire or stick your hand through lava or fire or something. So it's immune to fire, but only the hand, doesn't give you resistance or immunity to anything. And I was going to include charges, which I realize I overuse this mechanic a lot in my campaign. Every item I've given the players now is a thing has magical spells with charges. But it was going to have charges to be able to cast Burning Hands or Heat Metal with however many charges, and you could actually increase the level of the spell and use more charges if you wanted to. So think about doing that for Moradin's Gauntlet. My initial plan, back when I was really preparing this campaign, before I even knew what my players were going to play, is turn into a cool monk-only weapon. But that's back when Kaless was thinking about multiclassing Rogue Monk into a Shadow Monk. And I thought that'd be a cool way to do a monk weapon with some kind of a fiery iron gauntlet thing, but she ended up going monk at all. So I was like, well, I need to switch off from doing a monk weapon. I still like the idea of giving the players a suit of adamantine armor. Unfortunately, none of my freaking party uses medium or heavy armor. So I think it's going to have to be some kind of magical armor that can work for maybe studded leather, for example. And adamantine armor is still really good. It makes you not immune to crits. It turns crits into normal hits, so you can never be critted against. That is a huge, huge item. Really useful armor. So obviously, that's a big source of the DM's damage is being able to crit somebody. So I think that's a really, really good reward. And then I was thinking about, even on top of that, maybe offering some adamantine arrows / bolts, just a number of them, and they're just +1, essentially just +1 arrows or +1 bolts. So none of those would be actual weapons, but they're all still useful magical items. And I think that's a pretty good haul, and then maybe include some gems that the Fire Newts have collected, because there's a lot of battling. And then on top of all of that, I think I may have to level the players up because even though they've pretty much only done 2 dungeons, but by then, I mean, they've gone through the ringer. This has been a very interesting campaign where I've kept the players relatively low level for a very long time compared to previous campaigns. Our previous, for example, Prince of the Apocalypse lasted, I believe, a total of 57 sessions. And by the end, we were level 12. We're right now in session 54. We have a lot of campaign left, and they're level 6. I believe Storm King's Thunder lasted 60-some sessions, and again, we ended at level 11 or 12. So this one has been way more elongated in terms of... and I've mentioned this before, because so much of Chult is a Tier 1 hex crawl, you have to keep them in those low levels to make it interesting. Only with Trepidation, I finally... Basically, once they were out of the hex crawling part of the adventure, I put them into Tier 2, and now we're in Tier 2 doing all the kind of the side stuff around the edges of Chult. And they've been level 6 now for all of Wormheart Mine, and then the mine tunnels, and now Rackhamar. And Rackhamar alone, this is going to be the 4th session in Rackhamar, because technically we entered it 3 weeks ago, doing the whole like smoke tunnels and that thing. So that is plenty of time for the players to be level 6, and I'm not even sure where we finish Rackhamar tomorrow. I'm hoping we can, but again, combat can take a long time. So I think I'm leaning toward, and I wasn't sure before. I wasn't sure if I was going to level the players up when they reached Omu or before they reached Omu, or after this dungeon. I think I'm leaning towards letting them level up as an additional reward for completing these large dungeon crawls, which were basically completely side content compared to the main quest. Although, as they will get onto the map, they will discover that they are now in a nice little straight shot to get to Omu. If they block their sight with kind of fog cloud, they could do that. That's a good point. That is a good point. That'd be a great strategy for them too, if they lay down some fog cloud. I mean, the Fire Newts would be incredibly immediately suspicious and sounding an alarm, but they also would not be able to see the player, so that would be a good way they could stealth. That's very true. That would also, maybe even prevent me from completely ambushing them. I'm not even sure how I'd have to look back at the fog cloud. Funny fact, we're going to be covering house rules for DM Roundtable in a bit, so I'll be able to discuss more about my woes about fog cloud, but see if they would even try to do the ambush tactic with fog cloud in place. But that is a good point. They could definitely do that. I've played every campaign with fog cloud, and I hate that spell. Would Fire Newts lay traps? For example, let them open the first door without a problem and have that cause an alarm spell or an attack, or maybe barricade the door using all the furniture. I mean, they're not kobolds. I don't think they would have a lot of traps at their disposal, and they don't have a lot of time to prepare either, frankly. I mean, it's just an hour. What I was thinking is they would do the classic, like, both sides of the door kind of a thing, and maybe have somebody right there, and really basically be all... they would get their Spitfire back, too, on a short rest. They get their long-range attack. So they would basically try to set this up to where they are prepared for this door to be breached. Like, the second this door opens, they are going to go ham. I'm not sure how I would handle surprise rounds here, because both sides are pretty aware of the other. I think it would probably just come down to initiative at that point. I'm not sure if I would give the... I mean, the only way you could do it is if they were already in combat, then I could have all these guys do the hold action, I guess. Which maybe will be in combat before they enter here. I don't know. But they would get their Spitfire ability back, and I'm just picturing them being basically all prepared to attack whoever comes to the door. and be ready for it. According to Mike Merles, yes. Sage advice, can you short rest while in wild shape and gain the benefits of a short rest? Damn it. Damn you, Merles. Well, if nobody questions it during the stream, I'm still following my own rules. That's not an official house rule I have, but and I'm sure the Intrepid players will look it up and argue against it. And I, as a judge, I will probably sustain the argument. But for now, my ruling will be that you can only heal your beast form. Frankly, it just seems more balancy. Careful with adamantine weapons. Any hit is a critical hit in regards to the damage output. Is that how they work? Well, first of all, I wasn't going to give them adamantine weapons. I was going to give them adamantine armor. I thought the whole adamantine weapon thing was that it does damage to objects or something weird. But since you provided a source, I will look up the page. Yeah, all it says is whenever an adamantine weapon or piece of ammunition hits an object, the hit is a critical hit. I literally took that to mean object as in they're trying to hit a door or, there's some like magic items that have armor class or those kind of things. That literally that would be a crit. I wouldn't say that object would be. I mean, yeah, I guess you could have a bullshit plan. Be like, well, I'm going to hit his sword, so I'm going to get an automatic crit. I'm like, that's not how this is working. I hit that guy's armor. That's an object. That's a crit. Like, dude, no. Shut up. That's not what this means. That's how I'm reading it anyway. I'm reading it literally as if you struck a door, then you would get a crit on that. Not that it's anything is a crit. What I thought it would mean, and I think past editions of D&D did this, is it would increase your crit range. So like instead of getting a crit on just a 20, you would get a crit on a 19 or 20. That's something that previous editions of D&D did with certain weapons. I think that might be like a fighter ability now. Maybe on one of the subclasses. I haven't looked too deep into that, but maybe that's somebody's ability is they can increase their crit, which essentially means, I mean, if you crit on a 19 or 20 as opposed to a 20, you just doubled your chance to crit. So that's still a very effective thing, but otherwise, no, adamantine. What I'm doing I'm calling them adamantine bolts and arrows, but all I'm saying is it's a +1, just a +1 arrow, +1 bolt. That's all it is. Can an Allosaurus fit through that door or a bear? That's good. That's a good point. I don't think you can beast shape through each of the doors depending on the shape, so that'll limit the shapes for Theron. I think you're right. I've been pretty fast and loose with him being able to squeeze into certain areas, and I impose disadvantage. I almost treat it like you are restrained while you are in that space, and obviously it would be difficult terrain, but there are certain spots, especially in a forge built for dwarves, where I could put the kibosh on that. There's one thing for you to squeeze into a spot that's too small, but there's going to be some certain areas that are going to be straight up too small. So I actually do think that's a good point. I think this would be too small for a Theransaurus to make it through, and that would limit him to, say, a Deinonychus shape that he would have to use, which is interesting. I think having to pull him out of his comfort zone a little bit could be interesting too, which is another reason why I think these Fire News fortifying themselves in here is the smartest play they can make. Pathfinder objects at a hardness that would reduce damage. Yeah, like a DR. I think they have that in D&D, maybe? I feel like ships and things have like a flat damage reduction too. I'm not sure. But I think if you were to like attack a ship, then you have to do like a certain amount of damage to even do any damage to it, or there's some rule about that. Full damage to golems, that's... I guess you could argue that, couldn't you? Golem is an object. Or maybe like those animated objects I used in the Typhoon Palace that would be that. But again, they're not real adamantine arrows and bolts. It's just +1/+1 basically. I want to talk a little bit about plans for the future. So, because we're starting to get to the real interesting part of this campaign. For almost all of level 6 now, here's our hex grid I haven't seen in a while. Hex map. We've been stuck in these dungeons, and after Rackhamar, which hopefully will finish things up, I do want to wrap things up. If it gets to be you know, and I do like combat a lot, but I don't want to have a third session of mostly combat. So I will definitely have the fire newts uh, surrender at some point. Like they would once the players breach the area and start fighting down to the last couple dudes, I will probably have them uh, maybe not like throw their swords down, retreat, but maybe just like jump into the lava kind of a thing, and just try to like swim away because I'm pretty sure they would be immune. I mean, we determined they can't like breathe underwater or breathe under lava, I guess, even though they're amphibious. But you know what? Fuck it. The players don't know that, so maybe they do just disappear underwater and under the lava and roll away, just for a way to like speed things up and allow the players to essentially finish Rackhamar with tomorrow's session. Because I really don't see the need to drag this out any further. Although I am looking forward to one last cool hurrah here with having both sides having short rested and being able to come up with more of a tactical plan rather than just rolling up into them like they did before and just having a shit fight that they were kind of in the middle of it. Are you going to Wolverine Theron? I did not talk about Theron's reward, and I need to have a reward for him because this is technically still part of his personal quest. I probably should have done it at the end of Wormheart Mine because that was really his personal quest, but I kind of linked these two together, and that was the main reason they got involved here was because of Theron's relationship to Hugh and all these goings on. So, what I'll probably do, it's a really weird gift. Like, hey, we can adamantine your bones. I think it will be cool. And I think I think Reese would be really into it because I would include some interesting rules about it. I haven't nailed down the rules exactly, but what I was thinking was literally doing the Wolverine thing, lacing up his bones with adamantine and using like the forge and having him be birthed out of it and everything. I need to determine what the rules are for that. And I'm thinking maybe it even has some kind of a detriment to it. If I want to go full Wolverine, I'd have him be like, I was looking at the Flesh Golem's ability to go berserk, like when it reduces to a certain amount of hit points, and maybe like when his wild shape is reduced to a certain amount of hit points, he would have to roll a d6, and on like a 1, every time he's hit or at the start of his turn or something, he would have to roll against that. And on a 1, he goes berserk and just attacks the person nearest to him, which could be really interesting. And then I'd give him advantages, like he'd probably have built-in adamantine armor, so it'd be immune to crits, which would be fucking huge. Maybe I let him pop claws out and do more damage that way. I don't know. This might start getting really unbalanced, though. And I might have to balance that with, like, maybe you take damage every time you wild shape because it would break your bones so badly to have to be able to transform in that manner. I don't know. There's a lot of really questionable balance concerns I have about doing it. I think it's a really cool idea and a unique one because they're in a forge, and I don't know. It just seems like a funny thing to do to turn him into like a Wolverine type character. But the unfortunate thing, he's not quite the right class for it. Like, it'd be perfect if he was a fighter or a monk or something, but because he's a wild shaping druid, that creates extra complications because he's literally built to morph his body around, and the purpose of Wolverine's adamantine form is you can't really do a lot of damage to him. I mean, he takes a lot of damage, obviously, but I guess he can heal is his mutant factor. But it's the the hardness of the bones and everything can't really be broken. So obviously with wild shape, you're just constantly breaking your body around. So I haven't quite nailed it down yet. I'm still kind of looking forward to it. I do want to make it an option though, and if he declines it, I need to give him something else. So something I was thinking of would be that nightmare statue that he's had. I could have that turn into a statue of like blessing or something. So it does the opposite. Now that he's helped Hugh and helped all these dwarves, instead of causing him, some nightmares, now like every time he rests, maybe it does the effect of the bless spell, or I don't know, something good that can just occur. So that would be a way for me to use a character's trinket as their reward, which is kind of what I was looking at doing for everybody, although with varying results. I don't think, like, obviously Gillian's, we actually used the flying monkey, which I think was a better solution, for example. So I don't know if I'll be able to do it with everybody's, but that's just a thought that I've had. But I do want to give Theron a specific thing at the end of this this little campaign or this mini adventure with Rackhamar and Wormheart Mine. So in addition to the other rewards that I have planned, because they really should. They didn't really get much out of Wormheart Mine. They got the 1+1 rapier. I guess, well, they got a Dragon's Hoard of gold and treasure, but I want to give them a few more magic items in Rackhamar. Anyway, to wrap things up, I do want to have some encounters for Valley of Lost Honor, because they will exit Rackhamar up here, and then they've got a straight shot to Omu. So I've got my last chance for Chultan random encounters, basically in the jungle, because once we enter Omu, we are in the endgame now. We finally go to like chapter 3 after like probably session, near 60 at that point, which is nuts. I did not expect us to be a year later and still not in Omu. Holy crap, this is a long campaign. And we still like stopped the hex crawl at some point, like halfway through that. So I'm thinking about pulling off the Frost Giant encounter down here. Maybe have it be like they landed in Shilku Bay, or they landed somewhere and they're searching around the Valley of Lost Honor. Or maybe I might put them a little bit close to Omu, but they should be able to track the Ring of Winter. And obviously I want to tease the fact that Artist Kimber is either in Omu or right outside Omu. I really need to nail this down, but and maybe I was going to do another Fire Newt battle. I was thinking about doing this cool. I was picturing that scene from Mulan where all these armies are like coming down the mountain. I was picturing doing that with Fire Newts, but they might be too bleak. But maybe some kind of cool chase sequence where there's like a lot of Fire Newts chasing them, because the only note about the Valley of Lost Honor in Tomb of Annihilation is that the Fire Newts rule this territory. The only thing that they respect is the dragon, which the players killed, which now that the dragon's not in play anymore, the Fire Newts would be even more brazen. It would be kind of bleak, though, from a storytelling standpoint, if the players drove them out of Rackhamar, saved the day, and then as they are moving across the Valley of Lost Honor, they realize there are just hundreds of Fire Newts around. They're like, oh, well, I guess they're just fucked back in Rackhamar again. That's my only concern about pulling that off. Because I was just going to do a random encounter with Fire Newts attacking them. I'm like, I don't really want to do that because they just fought a bazillion Fire Newts, and it's not super interesting to just fight more freaking Fire Newts. But what could be interesting is doing a big, long chase sequence. That could be interesting, to where there's so many forces the players have to just run and try to dodge them out of the way. And maybe if they fail enough checks, they do have to have a Fire Newt fight, and then they keep on running. Do like the whole chase complication thing. I think that could be fun, with the caveat that hopefully they don't realize that, oh man, with all these Fire Newts around, did what we do just freaking matter? I don't know. Maybe the Bind Dwarves can shut the door, and that would end it. I don't know. They locked the door this time. I guess what happened, I explained it to Rackhamar, is that the dwarves had to flee because of a volcanic eruption, and then when they came back, the Fire Newts had already kind of taken over. So it's not like the Fire Newts just invaded straight up. So that would be a thing. Or maybe the players just don't care, but I like the idea of having a bunch of Fire Newts kind of chase them out of the valley. I like the idea of them meeting the Frost Giants as another reminder that people are searching for Artist Kimber. And then I finally have to nail down Artist Kimber, Zendala, and the Steel Predator. And I want to get through all of these either before Omu or right at the entrance to Omu. And I'm still working through this. Probably going to save that for next week's or the week after that's Crafting Annihilation again, depending on, I never know where we're going to end really. But I really need to nail that stuff down. I definitely want to resolve the Steel Predator for sure. And I think it'd be really fun to tie that into either Artist help saving them, or maybe having Artist and Zendala there, and then the big drama happens where she tries to attack him, and then the players are going, what the hell? And the Steel Predator shows up. I haven't quite nailed down what would be the most interesting thing about that. If you have any thoughts on that, feel free to let me know in the comments. But again, I will be kind of going over a lot of these things in the next couple of weeks as we lead up to Omu and finally get out of the massive interconnected dungeon crawl that we've done, because I am super excited about Omu. I think there's a lot of neat stuff going in there, a lot of good story stuff going on there. We can finally get back on the main track of the story and really have a better way of planning things out from here on out, because I love the way, the hex crawl has been fun. And I've kind of been able to put my players on a decently linear path. And once they enter Omu, it really becomes, they're still giving some exploration around Omu, but there's also points of interest that are pretty easy to bring the players to certain areas that I can prep for and create. And I'll have to create like another extra battle maps and all these things. There'll be a lot of prep work that I'm going to have to do in the next couple of weeks just on Omu alone, and then Bane of the Night Serpent, the actual Tomb of the Nine Gods. Good stuff. I believe, hold the door, yes. I believe that will do it for this week's Crafting Annihilation. Patrons, we are going to be recording the DM roundtable for this month in approximately 1 hour. I'm going to eat some lunch, and then I'll be back on Discord. So be sure to join me for that. We'll be discussing our house rules, and hopefully, if everything goes well, I can upload that video tomorrow. So thank you all for joining me for this week's Crafting Annihilation. Do check out patreon.com/RogueWatson. You too can join in to our DM roundtables. And of course, tune in tomorrow for our next Tomb of Annihilation session. I'll see you all then.